But the Bears only have 4 picks in this NFL draft. Now, you brought up they've essentially already drafted some players by trading these picks for established guys. Some of them you've locked up long term as well. But Ryan Poles talked a little bit about only having 4 picks and if that concerns him at all.
I do. We've looked at that. If we don't move at all, I think that's 25 picks in 3 years, which is over 8 and some change. So I like where we're at there. On top of being set up next year to have a pretty good setup as well. And I think it matches the draft. I think a lot of guys went back to school this year. I think you're going to see a significant drop off. Hopefully some guys squeak through, but it actually, the way we're set up in the draft this year actually pairs up really well with how I think it's going to play out.
When he talks, stuff makes sense to me more than it did with the previous regime. Like when Ryan Pace would talk sometimes, my eyes would roll back in my head, and I just kind of get dizzy. But when Ryan Poles talks, a lot of what he says makes sense. And that was a point I think that I first heard from you too, not you two, the band, but from you also, that look, the dynamic that exists in the draft this year is a little different than it has in the past.
Fewest underclassmen we've seen.
Because guys are going back to play at their schools because the NIL money is so good.
And it's not 5th rounders. It's 1st rounders that are going. Look at, a lot of people think Ohio State is going to run away with college football next year because they've had
Ryan Dale screw that up, won't he?
I mean, he could, but they've had a number of top 60 to 90 picks.
I just said
that are going back
to
school.
tweak my buddy Phil. But no, I think and Ryan Poles, I think that everything they do has an explanation behind it. Maybe this is the year to have fewer picks because of the anomaly that may exist as you have described it and as Ryan Poles talked about.
And he didn't tell you directly, but he basically justified why he traded for Ryan Bates, why he traded. It basically told you why I don't have a 5th, 6th, and 7th round pick this year.
Because the 5th, 6th, and 7 rounds are not what they have been in the past, and it's going to be harder to find gems. So what we're going to do is use that draft currency to trade for established players. Right. I kind of like it. Yeah. Like when they first traded for Ryan Bates, I was like, well, this must mean that he's going to be their starting center. Why would you trade a 5th round pick for a guy that really didn't play much last year? But he's a guy that they have had their sights on, and they signed him to an offer sheet several years ago. I think you have to have quality at the center position. And I hope that Ryan Bates is that guy, or the guy that they signed from that
Coleman Shelton from LA.
I mean, you've got to be good at center with a young quarterback. And hopefully somebody steps forward and plays that position exceptionally well. But I kind of understand the philosophy. If, in fact, the 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds are going to be less, there's going to be less talent there, then I could understand why you would go with the approach of having fewer picks this year.
Yeah. 312-332-3776 if you want to join us as well. Are you concerned that Ryan Poles only has 4 picks in this draft? Now, I'm
concerned that you want to get rid of divisions, but we can talk about that at another time.
Yeah, we've already talked about that ad nauseum today. I do think that when you look at what Ryan Poles has done in the past, he's been a guy, he's turned water into wine before when he turns having no draft picks. I look back to his first draft where what did he have, 5 picks or 6 picks?
Turned it into 8 or 9.
I think it was double digits by the time it was all said and done.
But maybe this is a year where having extra 6th and 7th round picks don't do you any good because there's not enough talent there.
Exactly.
Right?
So
I think maybe that. I mean, I think that this may be.
That doesn't mean there's not going to be talent in the first 2, 3, 4 rounds, and that's where you currently are slotted to have your picks. But does it look like? I kind of look at how far back would I be, and how much do I have to get in exchange for my 9th pick to move off of? I mean, there's going to be a pretty good player there at 9, whether it's an edge rusher, offensive lineman,
there's going to be somebody that
fits
a need.
Yes,
and is a difference maker.
No doubt about that.
I agree,
and I feel like you'd have to be getting a pretty penny in return if you do want to move out of that 9th pick if I'm the Chicago Bears.
Look, I mean, you could convince me too. Let's say all 3 top receivers are gone. Like the other kid from LSU is pretty
Brian
impressive.
Thomas, yeah.
You know, when I watch him run routes and when I watch him do stuff, and he's very fast and he's got good size. You could definitely convince me that if one of the top 3 receivers isn't there, Joe Alt isn't there, obviously one of the 2 top pass rushers could be there. But could you trade out of 9 and end up with something that would equate to still a better offensive tackle option than what you have now with Braxton Jones? And maybe you end up with a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. As a wide receiver. Like, you may be able to, if you don't have a pick of the litter type of player available at 9, you may be able to address 2 positions.
Right.
Albeit with guys that may not rank as highly as Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, or Joe Alt. But maybe you can address 2 positions with guys that are a little bit lower on other people's draft boards. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you may get better production out of those guys as well. You just don't know. There is a certain element of crapshoot that it goes along with this draft.
It's part of why I've always been against the haul as well. Like, it's the essence of hitting a parlay, too, when you get the haul. You got to hit on all those legs if you're going to make the trade worth it.
Right.
Because those picks...
It's giving you more swings.
Yes, it's giving you more swings, too. But if you miss on one of them, then you're really in trouble. And it doesn't necessarily equate to the worth of what you potentially could have had. So
the haul in this case is a quarterback that really excites them, most importantly, and excites a lot of people, that can be a difference-making quarterback. Didn't say generational, but a difference-making quarterback.
Or at least better than what your current situation is and cheaper than what your current situation is.
Yes. And that, to me, is more valuable than the so-called haul. If you're convinced, and it's what I've said for 6 months now, if you're convinced that that guy is significantly better, and listen, I think that Ryan Poles, when he was talking about the financial aspect of having a rookie quarterback and how it resets things, I don't dismiss that that's important to them. I think that was another element of him doing right by Justin and basically not saying, well, Caleb is significantly better in our opinion than anything we've had here over the last 2 years. I think he's actually being very judicious with his comments on that front. I agree, but I've always felt that you can't decide to trade Justin and pick a quarterback at 1 only because, or the overwhelming reason why is because you're resetting the financial clock.
It has to be talent-based.
You got to believe, yes, that guy is the guy. Yeah. That's got to be the at the center of your decision. And I think it is. But
yeah, I do too.
I think but Ryan Poles has done everything in a very professional manner.